One of the easiest ways to invest is through ETFs. There are many different kinds of ETFs nowadays, with each a different focus. Probably you have heard of the most famous ETF, the SP500, or maybe JEPI or SCHD. The reason to invest in ETFs are most of the time the same for the people. On one hand, it is a great way of diversifying your risk or allocation. And on the other hand, they require not a lot of maintenance. Especially for you, I created a winning ETF strategy that consists 3 ETFs. And I'm very excited to see what you guys think about these ETFs, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments. My name is Thomas and this is Thomas Invest. I'm an investor looking for great stocks at great prices. As said a minute ago, the most popular ETF is the SP500, and with reason. The SP500 resembles the overall market of the United States. It is considered the closest to a safe investment by many investors. On average, the SP500 has an annual return of 10% in the past 50 years, which of course is a great number, especially over a longer period of time. And did you know only a handful of investors are capable of beating the SP500 in the long run? Well, maybe that is or should be the only reason for most people to start investing in this ETF. Depending on your broker, country or personal preferences, you have many choices of investing in a different SP500 ETF. There are many different versions with small differences such as dividend distributions or allocations. And in some cases it really pays off to do some research in which SP500 ETF suits you the best. I chose to invest in the iShares SP500, which is listed in this description. This is because I don't pay any fees when I'm making one transaction a month on this ETF. That could be either selling or buying. It is also listed on the EAM stock exchange, which means that I also don't pay any yearly fees for having a stock on this stock market, since it is my home country and costs are covered for me here by my broker. This results in almost no transaction fees or yearly stock market fees. For me, the most efficient way of investing in an ETF. And as of right now, the SP500 is my largest position in both portfolios. This ETF has a total expense ratio of 0.07%, which is already really low, but there are ETFs with even lower numbers here. However, due to the other benefits explained before, it is still the best choice for me. This ETF pays a quarterly dividend that yields around 1% as of this moment. It used to be around 1.5%, but since the SP500 rallied a lot lately, the yield automatically comes down a bit. And whenever you decide to invest in an SP500 ETF, make sure to check if they reinvest the dividend into the fund, or that they pay out the dividend. This is all up to your personal preferences. The top 10 holdings in this ETF make up 34% of the total value, with Microsoft, Apple and Nvidia being the biggest. It can happen that there are small differences per ETF in the exact amount of value, because some ETFs do half a year rebalance and others have a different or no time frame. 96% of the investments are located in the US, which of course makes sense since we are tracking the US here. Technology is by far the biggest sector, which also makes sense with all the big companies here being a tech company. Looking at the returns, we see that year to date we have a 19% return, which is mainly driven by Nvidia's insane run. The 5-year return is at a whopping 106%, which is also really insane, resulting in a 20% average per year. Since 2002, when this ETF was launched, it has seen a 430% return, which is massive and results in a 19.5% on average per year. To be honest, over a period of 22 years, I think only a handful of investors are capable of matching that return. For me, the SP500 is the best, easiest and probably also the most safe way of investing. This particular ETF pays me also a 1% dividend yield as of right now, which is also nice. In the coming 10 to 20 years, I expect to have a similar return with this ETF. I feel safe on betting on the US market. That's also why it is my biggest position, and it always will be. I keep on adding shares almost every month, so that it stays the backbone of my portfolio. What are your thoughts on this ETF? Let me know in the comments down below. While I'm moving on to the second ETF. And this is a complete different ETF versus the S&P 500. I'm talking about the Morningstar Developed Market Dividend Leaders. This index tracks the performance of companies that display consistency and sustainability in dividend payment patterns and is composed of the top yielding securities. So basically it is a dividend ETF, but more on that in a minute. The total expense ratio is at 0.38%. And this specific ETF is considered a large ETF with 769 million assets under management and was launched roughly 8 years ago. While the S&P 500 exclusively focuses on the US market, this dividend ETF focuses on many different countries, but still the US is the biggest, with almost 22%. From there we see France, Japan and Germany also representing a decent amount. About 38% of this portfolio is a financial company, hence why the dividend yield is also pretty high, also because utilities and energy are a big portion of this ETF. The top 10 holdings of this ETF represent close to 32%, which is a decent amount, and Verizon leads the pack with 5%. From there we see some other big names. And as said at the beginning, this ETF focuses on paying a high dividend yield, with only market-leading companies. And the yield currently hovers around 4.5%, which is a really great number. This ETF pays the dividends in March, June, September and December. Looking at the returns, we see that year to date it is sitting at 8.4%, which is a decent number, but it is much lower versus the 20% of the S&P 500. On the full year number we are seeing 16.5%, and on the 5-year number we have almost a 70% return, which results in a roughly 14% average per year. Looking at the S&P 500 comparison, which I consider as a baseline, we see a big difference of nearly 70% versus 106%. But again, this ETF is focused on paying dividends, which could be reinvested in this or other holdings. As of right now, I do not own this specific ETF, but I'm planning to do so in the coming months, in my second portfolio, and probably also in the near future in my main portfolio. The main reason why I prefer this ETF over others consists of two things. With this ETF, you are spreading your investments over more countries instead of only the US, which could be a good and interesting move for many people. I also like the current holdings and the allocation. The biggest holding is 5%, and we're talking about market-leading companies here. There are many ETFs with a higher dividend yield, but it also comes with a price as in total returns. Many times, high yield equals higher risky companies that don't have a great ticker price performance, and solely focusing on dividends that are already considered riskier. With this ETF you have a well-established company that pay a total dividend yield of 4.5%, which is still a crazy number. What are your thoughts on this ETF? Let me know in the comments down below, while I'm moving on to the third and final ETF. And this ETF has only one goal: beating the market, and I'm talking about the SPDR S&P 500 US Technology ETF. And I know this is pretty similar to the regular S&P 500 ETF, but hold your horses here. As the name already suggests, the S&P 500 Technology Select Sector Index tracks the US technology and telecommunication service sector. And with a total expense ratio of only 0.15%, it could be a winning strategy to invest in this specific ETF. It is relatively a large ETF with 1.1 billion assets under management. While the other two ETFs are distributional, meaning they pay you a dividend, this ETF reinvests the dividends automatically for you. they focus exclusively on the US, and the top 10 holdings represent a whopping 66% of the total value. Why not buy them separately, you might ask? Well, not all investors are capable of buying fractional shares or have the money to buy as many shares to make a similar breakdown. But it has to be said, with the two most recent stock splits of Nvidia and Broadcom, things are easier now. This ETF beats the S&P 500 year to date with a small difference, and that's also because of the most recent run of Nvidia and some others. Looking at the 1-year return, we see 36%, and they have a 5-year return of 212%, again beating the S&P 500 that returned 106%, and functions as a baseline for me when it comes to returns. So they doubled their return, which is pretty crazy. I expect that the technology sector will still play a huge role at least in the coming 10 to 20 years. And yes, many tech companies are priced at a premium, and for some people it feels uncomfortable to invest in singular tech companies. Well, maybe this answers that problem. As of right now, I do not own this ETF, but I'm planning to add them in the coming months as well, primarily in my main portfolio, also due to tax efficiency and lower fees. What are your thoughts on this ETF? Let me know in the comments down below. And these were 3 ETFs for a winning strategy. There is no such thing as having a safe investment, or as some people call it, free money. But the S&P 500 is the closest it's get to me to having a safe return. The dividend ETF focuses on having an income to buy even more holdings and focus on established companies, also giving you somewhat of a safer investment. The third ETF is focusing on beating the market so that we have a higher return, and probably also making up for the lower ticket price return of the dividend ETF to average things out. The ETF above are just examples, and there are many similar ETFs managed by different people or companies. Always make sure to check if the specific ETF meets your criteria when it comes to taxes, fees, expense ratio and dividend. I'm planning to add the shown ETFs in the coming months, and I will keep expanding my ETF for the S&P 500. This doesn't mean you should do the same. And with that, we come to an end of this video. What are you currently buying and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And remember to always do your own research and never fully trust on what I or other YouTubers say about a stock. I'm not a financial advisor and this content is just for entertaining purposes only. I hope you liked this video and I did bring some insights of these companies to you. I would really appreciate a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to get notified when I'm posting a new video. Thanks for watching and I will see you in my next video.